Welcome to the TPG Leadership series, where we're going to be discussing C-level topics. And right now we're doing a series on digital transformations. We have an absolute bang up lineup of superstars here to give you insight into what's happening in one of the fastest changing areas of business. Just to give you an idea, 5 years ago, my name's Shane Phillips. I run an executive search business. So 5 years ago, when we would headhunt or go after chief information officers, we're generally placing them into another CIO job. Today, when you approach a chief information officer, it's very common for them to tell you, my next job is going to be into the chief executive officer role. And on September 29th, we have a CIO who will be joining us and talking about that. That's exactly what's happened to him. They started up a digital platform. Within less than 12 months, that platform went from being worth nothing to an evaluation of over $5 billion US. And that CIO then moves into the CEO role. So we're seeing a dramatic shift in what the leadership dynamics are. Historically, we used to see CEOs coming from sales. In the future, are we going to start seeing them coming from the technology front? We've also seen some massive changes in the way org structures run. And we've seen a huge expansion within the technology field, where maybe before you just had a CIO, where today companies will have a chief information officer, they'll have a chief technology officer, they'll have a chief digital strategy officer, they'll have an online revenue officer. So it's a massively expanding role, both horizontally and vertically. And so let me present, with no further ado, some of our guests today and my co-hosts. So our first co-host here is Mr. Nasser Zagha, who attended California State University and started his career out in Silicon Valley, working for companies like Netscape and Sun Microsystems. He then started up a .com startup and had a bit of the .com entrepreneur bug in Silicon Valley itself before joining Bank of America as a vice president of IT, where he spearheaded a lot of their digital transformation across the various segments. He then came back to the Middle East, where he was the chief information officer of Bank of Jordan. And after that, given the boom that we're seeing in the digital market, he had to jump in, got the entrepreneurial bug again, and founded Digital Analytica, which is a consultancy that helps companies with their digital transformations, where he is both the founder and CEO. Please welcome Nasser Zagha. You need to unmute yourself. So sometimes even the tech guys have technical glitches, but hopefully he'll get the unmute button there.
Yeah, well, thanks, Shane, for the introduction. No, I'm using multiple screens, and that's why we all learned our mistakes over here. Thanks. That was really a nice introduction over here. So we're going to be co-hosting this session over here. And Shane, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our guests. Speakers, sure. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And my other co-host, as well as my co-pilot in our TV show, if anyone's watched the TV show Bedazzled, which is on B4U and B4U AFLAM, it's playing Fridays at 7 p.m. You'll catch me and Peter Baker giving you the career tip time, which is a nice 2-minute segment to give you a little boost. And you might have seen us together on a few other shows that we've done. Peter is an Australia native, a graduate of the University of Technology of Sydney. He then aspired for an international career and wanted to leave the great island. He joined Procter & Gamble and got exactly that. Very soon he found himself as a divisional head of HR, looking after all of Asia. And that gave him a very good insight into leadership development and very solid foundation in HR. He then joined Maersk, the global shipping company, where he became one of 3 global heads of HR, overseeing over 11,000 employees in 100 countries. This is a man who has a lot of HR experience. He then joined First Abu Dhabi Bank, one of the largest banks in the Middle East, as the Group Chief Human Resource Officer. And now, after participating in hardcore business, hardcore commerce, his heart has softened up and he's joined Plastic Bank to help make the world a better place. Please welcome Mr. Peter Baker.
Thank you very much, Shane, and it's great to be here to talk about this this important topic. Yeah, I've left First Abu Dhabi Bank and now working at Plastic Bank, which is one of has a mission to remove ocean plastic and use the circular economy to empower underprivileged communities. So I'm delighted to be part of that journey. But actually, we are also a technology company, or very much a technology company, and so much of the lessons around digital transformation that are super relevant for big 10,000 employee banks are equally relevant for smaller, more startup-oriented organizations that still need to undergo their own transformation. So that's why I'm delighted to join you here today with perhaps a little bit of a leg in both camps of the large and small ways of working.
Great, welcome, Peter. And before I'll just give you a quick bio on myself and why I'm here. The Phillips Group was founded by my father in 1984. So we've been placing board members and CEOs for almost 36 years. We just placed the CEO of Tim Hortons Middle East, and as a Canadian, we're very proud to have done that placement and help bring you guys North American style coffee to the Middle East. And of course, our next guest is smiling because he's also a Canuck, a Canadian, Mr. Robert Webb. He has a bio so long, it's unbelievable the things he's done. He's truly a giant among people in his field. He's currently the founder of TBM Partners, an Abu Dhabi-based consulting and coaching firm based on technology and business transformations. He's also a certified coach, and previously he's held the global chief information officer roles at landmark brands such as Etihad Aviation Group, Hilton Worldwide, Equifax, as well as divisional CIO roles at companies such as MetLife and GE. He's an expert in leadership of large-scale technology-enabled change and works with investors, businesses, and governments around the world. This is really a man who's seen it all when it comes to digital transformations, one of the most experienced talents we have in the GCC. We're really honored to have him with us today and join us to talk about digital transformation in the Middle East. Please welcome Mr. Robert Webb.
Good to be here, Shane. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And with that, I'll let Nasser Zagha, as our technology guru, here to start with the first round of questions and the slings and arrows, which we may hurl at Robert over the next hour. So please, Nasser, do your worst.
Great. Well, thanks, Shane, for the introduction. I know that our guests and co-speakers, they have really massive background. Hopefully, we'll all learn from them, and I'll be the first one to learn from them as well. So the very first question, and which we should all ask: what is digital transformation? What does it mean to us? Why we need to do it? And I want to start with Robert. Robert, please tell us, a bit about digital transformation. So we will, get more insights why we should do it.
Sure. So, digital transformation, it's a terribly overused buzzword. So I'll kind of just first put that out there. But when we talk about digital transformation, what we mean is the fundamental rethinking of how businesses are operated and pervasively using a wide range of different technologies and changing business models. So you can think about, having come from the hotel business, you can think about Airbnb as a new competitor to hotels. The market capitalization of Airbnb is over $100 billion. Hilton Hotels is, I think, $36 billion. So these technology companies have dramatically transformed kind of the way we do things in society. And I would just sort of say, transformation is the part of that word that is, or part of that term that's problematic, because rarely do things transform, broadly and holistically in our world. It's more often for companies that there is digitization of processes where we are implementing SAP or Oracle to streamline finance or supply chain or customer management. And rarely is it a full transformation. Most frequently, these are transitions where it takes, a year, 2 years, 3 years to change certain elements of the business. And these are very, very high risk endeavors. In fact, the deep academic research that I've done and speaking with dozens of CIOs around the world highlights that over 80% of these programs fail. So it's very, very high risk for companies and for the executive who are leading these kinds of transformations.
Great. So based on this percentage, which is kind of alarming, I would say, what's your advice?
Well, it's not a simple answer, but if you look at the reasons why these programs are tending to fail, they tend to fail for three major reasons. Number one, surprisingly, is not technology. The technology is getting easier and easier, but the number one issue is about culture and the need to change the corporate culture in terms of how it thinks about and works to implement certain technologies in those businesses. So this is number one, is culture, and we can talk about that in detail. The second is people, which is really, a lot about building, retaining, attracting the right talent to do this kind of work. Technology leaders are in tremendous demand all over the world, and the work can be done from anywhere now. And banks, telcos, hotel companies, governments need to get their unfair share of this talent to be successful, and think through, do they buy that talent? Do they build it? Do they borrow it? And then finally, the other major failure is around data. Data is, in most companies, especially here in the Middle East, it is non-standard. It's all over the place because we have complex application portfolios. So we have too many different systems that have grown up on top of each other over the years, and we haven't thoughtfully rationalized, simplified, and moved those kinds of applications towards the cloud and towards more modern computing kind of stacks and styles. So those are the three major things to think about: culture, people, and data.
Marvelous. Well, this will bring us to the next question, and actually, I would like to hear first from Pete to elaborate a bit about the culture, the people, and the talent. How can you get such individuals in your corporation, and what kind of strategy do you have in mind, Pete, to move forward with such thing?
No, absolutely. Thanks, Nasser. And I'd love to build on those points that Robert has made. Yeah, I mean, my definition of culture is, what people are doing when their boss is not looking. And so what you see is people revert back to what they are most familiar with. And so it does require leaders to be insistent, to be persistent, to be consistent around driving that culture change. Otherwise, it's just like a rubber band that will just spring back. I think what we have to realize is many leaders are working perhaps 3, 6, 9 months ahead, but the people doing the work are working on what's right in front of them. And so leaders often think, oh, I've sent the message around how we need to change working. I've sent the message around different approaches, and now I've moved on to the next interesting project. But your people are still knee deep in managing that change. And so, a huge part of it is leaders themselves taking responsibility for role modeling and driving the culture that will be required. I think there is a particular issue in this region that we all as leaders have to solve. I think there's two particular cultural issues that make digital transformation perhaps even harder than in most. The first is the kind of hierarchy and the deference to hierarchy that comes out in a lot of the cultural surveys across many organizations. And frankly, digital transformation requires robust debate. It requires you to be able to disagree with your boss. And it requires organizations to have a culture that can enable that disagreement. And then the second thing is the whole failure concept. Digital transformations do require a culture that allows and frankly even embraces failure. And that really in this region is something that many organizations struggle with and many individuals struggle with because they don't want to take a risk. They don't want to put their employment at risk. They don't want to put their residency status at risk if something goes wrong. And so there's a cultural bias in many of the studies around sticking to the safer option, which makes radical digitalization and frankly approaching a topic in a very different way to what it had been done before. It makes that more difficult to drive than perhaps it would be in other settings. So I think that's something that leaders need to be particularly mindful of in this region as they go and drive digital transformation in their organizations.
Makes a ton of sense, honestly, and if you want to do agility and you have hierarchy, some individuals, they might not accept the fact that they're going to be having different roles at different times. Again, I'm going to go back to Robert on this question, actually, the hierarchy, what's your take on it, Robert?
I think, digital transformation and digital transitions, it's a full team sport. So everybody needs to be equally engaged in these new ways of working. And, you mentioned Agile, and I've seen Agile work very, very successfully in some companies, and I've also seen it work or not be successful. Really be a complete failure. And the key is to be able to differentiate where things inside the organization, typically controlling functions, need to be tightly managed, and where things need to be loosely managed. And I'll give you this example. Things like information security or things like architectural standardization, those are controlling functions where we need to do typically a more centralized, tighter management of those. Application development, by contrast, is now innovating at the edges. So you've got the actual products for a bank or a telco being a software product that is being developed. And those need to be loosely coupled. So those need to be happening out at the edges together with customers in much shorter cycle iterations. So the days of, the $100 million SAP program, those are kind of going away. And now modern companies are thinking about these bite-sized projects, which are lower risk. And it doesn't mean that we want failure, but when we do have something that goes off track, we learn from that issue and we've contained the risk. So then we can move forward and recalibrate. So this is a way that organizations develop agility and also learning agility, because learning agility is the number one antidote to resistance to change. So the more you're learning, the more likely you are going to be able to absorb new change inside the organization, which is really fundamental here. And at the heart of that is the development of people. So, I kind of go back to, we really need to be investing in our people in the Middle East, in companies that are embracing, technology-enabled change.
So going, to the question about failure, again, and you've touched a bit on it, many corporations, they're risk averse. What's your take on it? How can we overcome that point? I mean, just when Peter stated, that people are so worried about, losing their jobs, or basically, getting canned or getting deported or what have you, what's your take on that? How can you overcome such an obstacle?
It's very simple. It's very simple. As soon as you're scared, as soon as a human being is fearful, their IQ points, go down, right? Like you don't make good decisions. You don't make good decisions as an individual or a team if you're under, you have tremendous fear inside the organization. So you need to eliminate the fear and eliminate the top-down sort of inspection fear that often exists. And the way you do that is by having great communication, engaging frontline employees and engaging customers, and really walking the talk with respect to the fact we're in this together. So when problems happen, and they will happen, you have delays, you have issues, it's complicated, to really own those and take responsibility to resolve them, and really go into it at the beginning saying, 80% of these things fail. These are the reasons why we're going to reduce the likelihood of failure. And the other thing I would add is not let vendors, suppliers, the big technology organizations oversimplify these things, because it's complicated, and oftentimes what happens is during the business case process, people develop these business cases which have huge benefits, and we're going to put this in a year, and it's actually much more complicated, but they've inflated the case to sell the project.
Absolutely.
And I think you really need to avoid that in most circumstances.
Absolutely. They just want to basically make their sale, and that's about it. So in other words, that brings us to the next question. Do you believe that strategy drives transformation or technology drives transformation?
I mean, my view is that, you need to have a really well-balanced approach to this. And I would start with people in leadership, culture, people in leadership. The soft stuff is the hard stuff when you start to talk about digital transformation or digital transitions. I would avoid developing a digital strategy. You don't need to go out and pay one of the MBB consulting firms millions of dollars to develop a strategy. You need to actually develop the trust, develop the team, and begin to test and learn in a thoughtful, experimental way, because things are changing so rapidly that your 3 or 5 year plan will be outdated by the time the MBAs have left. And similarly, you can't just go buy SAP or go buy Oracle or cold call Accenture and have them screw some of this stuff in. It really needs to come from within your company, because only you and your employees really know the context of your markets and products and culture, frankly. So it's really a revolution that's got to start inside the company, and you can have lots of people help you, but it's got to start inside.
I like what I'm hearing right now. And honestly, what we all hear in the market is basically strategy comes first. You got to build the full-fledged strategy to move forward and to succeed and so forth. But I like your notion on it. I like the way you looked at it, from different angle. I don't want to call it philosophy. It's more of basically in-depth thought and knowledge that you're putting in, based on your expertise. I love that. Great.
And I have to give credit where credit is due. This is not my philosophy. This comes from MIT. Jean-Ann Ross, a professor who's looked at this over the past 25 years, and this test and learn concept, together with Agile and building the organizational capabilities to transform your company. This really is where that comes from. But I've seen it in practice, having been a CIO and watched these things, be successful, and made some huge mistakes myself. Like I've learned through, those projects that go off track because they're too big or too reliant on certain suppliers, or we haven't spent enough time developing the people. And I think this message should really resonate here in the UAE and in Saudi, because the governments of these countries should be investing and must continue to invest in great talent, great local talent that has this knowledge to transform their economies.
Marvelous, marvelous. I love what I'm hearing over here. Pete, I would love to hear your take on it. Robert, he floored it. He gave us really a ton of really massive, very rich knowledge over here. I would love to hear your point of view on it.
No, I think I would simply build on the way Robert has framed it. And I think the particularly Agile, I'm really, really interested in how leading in an Agile way, and when we say Agile, we mean the actual Agile methodology, is different for leading perhaps in a waterfall or a traditional way. And I think the best organizations invest in their leadership capability so that their leaders can switch between the two. Sometimes you're leading an Agile team, an Agile project, you need to ask Agile related questions around product backlog and definition of done and work in sprints. In other ways, in a more waterfall setting, you're doing your kind of traditional management by objectives. And having I think Robert spoke about the concept of learning agility, having that learning agility and the emotional intelligence to be able to switch between the two is really key. And the best organizations, if you can do that well, then you're on the path to be able to conduct the right digital transformation. I think Robert is right that starting at that point is the right way. I worked at Maersk shipping line for a number of years, and that's exactly how we did it. We started building the leadership capability, frankly, before we invested a couple of $1 billion in the IT and the landscape architecture to actually undergo the transformation. And so by the time the transformation came, our leaders had the skills to be successful, and that is one of the reasons why Maersk's digital transformation, I think, is certainly been seen as the most successful within the logistics industry.
My question to you, given the fact you've worked so long in the human resources area, do you basically hire fresh blood into your corporation, or you update the knowledge or internally to embrace such change? You're talking about, digital transformation is a massive change. It's a massive change management within the organization itself, which requires, most of the individuals to embrace it. How can you make sure that such individuals, the current employees will embark on such a change? What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's the classic question: do you build, do you buy, do you borrow? And frankly, the answer is yes on all of those things. I think most organizations that have needed to step change their digital transformation have had to go out externally and bring in people from other entities. You frankly need that injection of fresh blood and that willingness to challenge the status quo in some roles in order to turbocharge. But I'm also a believer in internal progression and giving people the opportunity to learn and grow. And that for me as a HR leader is the best message that you can say to an employee is the world of work is going to be different. The way we're working is going to be extremely different. We are going to give you an opportunity to work in a different way. We're going to give you the skills to work in a different way. And if you embrace it, you're going to be successful. If you're trying to hold on to the way things were back 5 years ago when you first started, then you're going to struggle. And so that proactive message is we are going to invest in you. We're going to give you those skills in order to allow you to work in a different way. And if you're willing to embrace it, then we're all on our way. The third B actually that Robert mentioned was borrow. And I think that's actually also super interesting, where you're starting to see a lot of kind of embedding from universities, from research institutes, from consulting companies of where you might bring in some talent for a period of time. I think it's less prevalent in this region, but extremely prevalent in the US at the moment is just bringing people in, gig economy, bring someone in from a research institute for 6 months to help turbocharge, and then they go back and do something else. And frankly, HR leaders and leaders overall are going to need to manage that bucket. Where do we need to buy? Where can we build our own? And where do we need to borrow and then move on?
Marvelous.
And Nasser, I would just build on Peter's point. Sometimes you need a catalyst, individual player to come in to help make the change happen. And typically that a couple of years back, CDOs, chief digital officers, were very popular. So that people would bring in a CDO and for 2 or 3 years, they'd run a bunch of digital things. But one of the things to step back and observe is when you use systems thinking, organizational systems, information systems, financial systems, the organization always wins at the end of the day. So you could have a star player, but that star player is going to be frustrated or pushed out if the organization doesn't embrace them and embrace the holistic and integrated change that needs to occur. So this is a little bit of a different thing to get your head around, but I would strongly recommend against creating sort of haves and have-nots in the organization. So having sort of all the new folks working on the fun, sprint, agile, modern technologies, and having other people working on the old mainframe legacy infrastructure stuff. I mean, that is not a recipe for success because these systems are highly integrated and you need to think about it in that way that really builds the integration and the community, frankly, of professionals inside the organization. And that's true also with these cross-functional agile teams. So when done right, technology people will learn a lot more about product, and salespeople will learn a lot more about technology, and you'll have tighter teamwork inside the organization. That's really the key.
And we've heard a successful story from Xerox on this topic where they've done, cross-functional teams, and it worked out well for them and brought them back into the market, I would say. So I like your approach on that one. But I would like to retouch on the data, obstacle. We've talked about it a bit, and you said it's one of the impediments, when it comes to digital transformation and so forth. And we've heard a lot, from different institutes over here in this region that they're having a hard time moving forward due to the legacy systems, and they cannot basically, just throw those legacy systems away and say, oh, we're gonna just, we're not gonna worry about them for right now. We're going to move on with new technology. You don't want to ostracize such, important systems and move forward to newer ones without having the ability to integrate them. What's your take on that? What do you do?
Look, data and data analytics, that's the new kind of gold or oil, right? So it's the insights that you can derive from that data. It's not about the application itself or the program. It's about the data that is stored in and flowing through those programs. So that is the first step, is to understand where are our data assets, what applications are they sitting in, are they secure, how will they migrate to the new world? So understand, here's where we are now, and here's a complete inventory of our applications, infrastructure, data assets, and then really figure out where we're going, and then how are we going to evolve that transition. So you're not going to flip a switch and suddenly go from, a legacy banking environment to a modern banking environment. It's going to be something that happens one step at a time. And that's the journey that needs to be well architected. So when I say it's not about creating a digital strategy, it's really about creating a digital roadmap from kind of where you are now to where you want to go. And that's a very practical and changing thing. And you won't necessarily get there in a straight line. You're going to have some detours. You're going to have some issues along the way. And you're going to have, just like a GPS, you're going to have to recalibrate, how do I get to my destination? Because things are moving too quickly in the world.
Absolutely. You got to build the purpose, and have a clear purpose and goal for your team members, where they're going to go with the data, where it's going to end up being used, in other words. Great.
And how are you going to make money from it? Okay, we can answer a lot of questions, but is this going to allow us to reduce our credit card delinquencies or increase our originations, or whatever your business? You're going to need to think, how are you practically using that data? And that's always a good test, is what are the questions we're trying to answer with this, right? Or what are the business outcomes we're trying to drive?
Absolutely. We've seen, and I don't want to call it an attitude, rather than, probably it's a cultural type of thing where when a leader comes into an institute, he or she will bring in their guys, they'll bring in a fresh blood with them right off the bat. What's your take on that? Does it help the institute or not? Does it cause basically a friction between the current employees versus the new incomers? What's your take on that? And then we're going to go to Pete on it again. So I would like to hear from you.
My view is that every situation is totally different, and the leader needs to assess the nature of that situation and the team that they've inherited. And I would strongly recommend against bringing in a playbook that you've used somewhere else and the people that you've used somewhere else, other than if it's in a very specific area where you have an acute short-term risk. But it tends to not be successful. And I came from General Electric, right? And a lot of General Electric leaders have learned this lesson the hard way. It's like, don't try and replicate what you did there in this next place, because it's different. And the same is true in the Middle East, right? Like operating in Abu Dhabi or in Riyadh is very, very different than in London or New York. And you need to really develop those local leaders and figure out who are your local partners who you can execute well with, and your global partners that can help you in that regard, and really understand the context of your business strategy.
I like the term playbook. That's really a good term for it, I would say. Where basically you redo what you've done before, which may not fit in your next role, and given the fact that things are changing dramatically on a daily basis these days.
In fact, oftentimes, the things that you knew before are the things that you should not do in the new situation. So for example, if you had a plan and inspect kind of traditional waterfall mindset, that's exactly the behavior you do not want to have in an agile world. So what got you here won't get you there, is the phrase that kind of describes how leaders also need to change, right? Forget about the stuff you might have done, earlier in your career, maybe not forget all of it, but forget some of it so you can learn new things. And it goes back to learning agility.
Absolutely. Pete, it's your take on this subject. I would like to hear your point of view.
Yeah, this is it's of course one of the most fraught questions that new executives need to answer in their first 90 days. If you bring in folks that you've worked with before, that you're familiar with previously, it helps you move faster. But it sends a signal to the organization around the fact that you're not willing to bring them with you, that you're not willing to invest in building capability of the existing team. So there's positive upsides, but also negative consequences if you do it that way. If you do it the other way and try and set the vision, build the capability of the existing team, and perhaps promote some internal people up, it sends a wonderful signal to the organization around your commitment to talent development, and therefore you're more likely to get the organization bonded towards you. But it may mean that the transformation occurs slower. So I think if you're a CIO coming into a role, I mean, the key question to understand is how much time have you got? Because honestly, if you're expected to produce extremely fast results, you probably need to take some more risks in terms of turfing out the existing folks and bringing in some folks who will probably break some things along the way, but will achieve a more rapid transformation with perhaps a higher chance of failure. If your board and your CEO is a little bit more patient and a little bit more willing to work with you, then I would start with the building the capability of the existing team. I mean, presumably, if someone has been come into an organization, it's because they have capability that the internal folks didn't have. And hence, if you've got the time, build that team, bring them with you, and you'll have then the loyal support of them across the whole transformation.
My goodness, I can keep on going with you guys till the morning, to be honest. You guys are really awesome. You got a lot of information and a lot to learn from, but the time is basically ending. I want to hear from our audience if they have any questions that they want to basically ask our gurus over here. And if not, we can conclude in 2 minutes. So I'm going to give them the chance to ask any questions. In the meantime, I would like to hear a bit from Robert. Okay, Robert, I loved that point that Peter talked about, about the new blood and basically how it affects the institute. Do you think that having such a blood will create an unneeded friction between the current employees and the new employees as well?
I think Peter summarized it very accurately, right? It depends on the speed at which the situation needs to be addressed, and it depends on whether it's a turnaround, whether it's sustaining the success, whether it's taking the company to the next level. The CIO, before they come into the organization, really needs to understand the context of their entry and discuss those factors. And one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received in my career was slow down so you can speed up. And what that really means is understand all of these interrelated dynamics, right? the application portfolio, the financials, the risks, the people you've got, the suppliers you've got, the projects you have underway. And when you understand that current situation landscape, then you can make smart decisions, and we can help you make smart decisions with respect to, boy, we've got an information security issue. I got to bring in somebody I know, or I've got to insource that or outsource some other thing, or there's a number of different plays that you can execute. But as I said, every situation is different because, every bank, every telco, every government has its own history of systems and projects and culture, and you really need to custom tailor that set of solutions to the situation that you step into.
Marvelous. So we've got a question. Okay, the question is how to deal with resistance in the IT department, where people may have fear or behaviors that are defensive. Okay, what kind of behavioral training, coaching you recommend to deliver? Okay, so interesting question. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
Well, look, anytime you get a new leader, you've got a significant change, you're going to have a lot of resistance. And I think the number one thing you've got to do is communicate, and that means starting out by just listening to people, right? Like, just have town hall meetings, have one-on-one meetings, have small group meetings, figure out how we got here. Because you're probably walking into a situation where somebody wants it to be different, but the people who know it best are the people who are there in the organization. So that means having the empathy, the humble behavior to just sit down and talk with folks, right? And I'm talking about the guy working on the help desk, or the woman project manager, or the security person who's concerned about a whole bunch of existing risks that people have been, sweeping under the carpet. I mean, you got to listen to those folks. So I would say that would be my number one piece of advice: is open, honest, and humble communications with folks.
Marvelous. I like that, Pete.
Honestly, Nasser, yeah, I come back to the old John Cotter theory of change management, right? Okay. There are 6 reasons why a human being would resist a change, right? The number one and most critical is leadership role modeling. What do they see and hear from their leaders? If they're hearing something different, they're not going to embrace the change. Then the others is, do the people have the right resources to be able to make the change? Do they have the capability, meaning the skills to do it? Are their KPIs appropriately changed so that they can embrace the new change? Are there artifacts, so kind of reminders of the old way that are constantly reminding them of the old way? And then are the processes, the business processes, adjusted sufficiently? So we often assume, oh, this person won't change. But honestly, if you haven't changed their KPIs, and if the posters up in the office still remind them of the old way of doing things, and actually their line manager is still acting in the old way, then you can't be surprised that people will resist. So I think it starts with exactly what Robert said, that coming in and having that empathy of understanding the reality of the world from employees' point of view, but then really assessing against that 6 criteria and say, okay, what do we need to change? Okay, we need to step change the capability. We need to change the KPIs. We need to change the processes. We need to change all the artifacts, and go and deliberately do that, and you'll give yourself the best chance of overcoming the resistance within the organization.
Marvelous. Thank you. I mean, I loved your answer, both of you guys. I want to see if there are any other questions coming up. If not, we're going to conclude. We ran 4 minutes over the assumed time. I know we can keep on going, so I think I don't see any other questions right now. So Robert, I would like to thank you. Peter, I would like to thank you for your time, and everyone who joined us. Shane, again, thanks for facilitating the whole thing. That was really awesome, by the Phillips Group. So I think it was really great. We got one more question. Let's see. Ali Bank Oman, we're to embark a large digital transformation program.
However, you take that, Robert, not me.
our bank is in complete silos. Okay.
Yeah.
Our
Well,
digital journey is being driven by a vendor. Okay, here it is. It's a vendor.
I'll just sort of say, look, you know, ask for help, right? Go talk to the people who've got the battle scars from doing this stuff before.
Yeah.
And you know, Peter has those scars. He's been in the, you know, big bank and a big shipping company, and this stuff is not easy.
Yeah.
So, you know, don't fall into this trap of sort of oversimplifying it, believing all the vendor hype, and, you know, going to try and win the CIO of the Year trophy. I mean, have a real conversation with somebody who knows and who's screwed up a few of these things along the way in their career. And we do that. You know, and my sense is, you know, you really just need to slow down, make sure you got a clear plan, and you've got, you know, the support you need to be successful, and your chances of not being in that 80% failure mode will change, right? So, you know, really do the math and start with culture, you know, people, and think about data and the speed of your change and the situation that you're inheriting, as Peter highlighted.
Exactly. Honestly, I'm a bit worried that the vendor is driving the whole thing, you know, rather than them driving the
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem in this part of the world as well, too. But again, that is the dynamic you have in how you manage suppliers as well. You know, the Middle East is notorious for software suppliers and systems integrators selling you the software, you know, selling you the first part of the project and running away, and you're kind of stuck trying to make sure this works, and you're delivering the business case that you've signed up for. So, you know, you really need to manage the risk of that. And again, you know, that means making sure you're surrounded by the right capabilities, both internal capabilities and external capabilities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much for having us today. It was really a wonderful set of questions.
Thank you for being here. And we're going to conclude at this point. So again, Robert, Pete, pleasure all ours. Shane, thanks again one more time for facilitating, and everyone else who helped us out. You know, thank you for being with us. You know, again, I can name a ton of people who worked on this initiative. So I'm just going to say thank you, and that's about it for now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nasser. Thanks, Shane. Great to see you again, Robert.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Shane. Thank you, Nasser. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.